I'm here in Hove, Brighton and Hove, and there's a by-election on the 1st of May, and I'm here with the Independent Socialist candidate David Maples. There's a team here. It's 11 o'clock on Good Friday, and there's still quite a lot of people here. It's a big by-election because it's obviously we've got Starmer cutting everything, and the MP in this constituency is Peter Keir. If Labour loses this by-election, it would be quite a big sign that Peter Keir's seat is in danger. So I want to find out what the local issues are here and to find out what David's standing for. We'll follow their canvassing session and talk to people as we go along. It's Good Friday and we're outside the Labour HQ. They're praying that they win on the by-election. Listen. I can't get a signal around here. I don't know what's going on. I mean, what's the matter with this?
Well, the thing is, the local MP is actually the Secretary of State for Technology, so you'd think that he'd be able to sort of do something about that, wouldn't you?
Look, if you're in Brighton and Hove and Libby's not in your campaign, then it's not a campaign. Okay? Libby is always out there at Brighton. She's saying, "Why aren't you down in Brighton?" I've come all the way down to Brighton. I said, "When should I come down here?" She said, "ASAP," and I came down the next day.
I was very impressed, Crispin.
Am I not?
Yeah, I said Crispin come and Crispin came. Yeah.
Tell us, why is it important that people come and support David's campaign?
Well, because David stands on good values, good socialist values and principles. He stands for the community, people in the community, and helping people in the community. He helps a lot of disabled people in the community. He helps people with housing issues, and housing is the number one issue in Hove. And I'm really, really angry about what the Labour Party is doing to the country nationally, but also locally. They've closed a school, they're closing libraries. These cuts are going to severely impact so many thousands of people, so many families. What we need is to make sure that this majority council, which is majority Labour council, stops and thinks about the damage it's doing to ordinary people. Yeah, we can't carry on. So I'm really proud to be canvassing for someone like David, who stands up for disabled people and who stands up for people in our community. He's a really solid community person, and to have a voice in the council where you don't just have to be a sheep, you don't just have to follow the whip. You know, there are councillors who follow that whip and they don't believe in all these cuts. But they're doing it because they belong to the Labour Party. I think it's really important that voters get out there and say, actually, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, your cuts are not accepted by the community.
How do you see this campaign going? Is it going well?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think speaking to people on the doorstep and campaigning, there's a lot of anger towards the Labour Party and the Labour Council in Brighton and Hove in particular. Especially, I think the fact that Brighton earlier this year said that they're going to have something like a £17 million shortfall in next year's budget. And obviously, where's that £17 million going to come from? It's going to be council tax going up, increased service charges, more cuts to funding for local services. Libraries are being shut and having their hours reduced, for example. So the Labour Council is effectively saying local residents are being expected to pay more to cover it. And I think their support has been really shaken by that.
Why do you think it's important to have an independent socialist and not just vote for the Greens?
Yeah, and I think obviously a layer of people do look at the Greens as being an option to the left of Labour, but obviously people haven't forgotten when they previously ran the council in Brighton, they also implemented massive austerity, even provoked a strike of the bin workers. Obviously people have seen as well in Bristol this year, they're implementing something like £51 million of cuts to their budget. So while the Greens are better on some issues, in reality they're another austerity party. When they get into power, they say local people have got to pay, and they're not willing to lead a campaign outside the council chambers, which is what we say would be necessary to win the funding back.
Other than the bin strike, are there any other reasons why the Greens would not be seen as good in Brighton for all their record as for running the council?
Yeah, I think there was the building of the I-360, which has been a very unpopular project, and obviously has now racked up huge debts. It's not injected money into the city. But primarily, when the Greens came in terms of the cost of council tax, the quality of public services, there was no difference. There was no real increase in spending or a community control. So largely they're viewed as not being different than any of the other parties. I think that's why it's so important that we've got a socialist candidate to show people there actually is an alternative. And crucially, that councils do have a choice. So you don't have to make cuts every year. We would put forward, and we helped local trade unions lobby the council on this issue, that they should be using their reserves and their borrowing powers, just for this year to stop any cuts. And then crucially, they've got to demand that Starmer gives them the money back.
So I'm with David. I was interested to hear how he put himself forward for this election, because he's an independent socialist. We had in the general election a lot of people saying they were the independent candidate, and that split votes. So how did it happen here?
Well, we'd had a tremendous general election campaign, which Tanushka Marah stood and got over 3,000 votes, which was 5.9% of the electorate, and we wanted to continue that. So her election campaign had transformed itself into Collective Action Brighton and Hove. When there was a vacancy, when the Labour councillor stood down, we proposed that we had open hustings. So anybody who was broadly supportive of the ideas which Tanushka had put forward could put themselves forward to stand in those hustings. So we had the open hustings. There were two candidates. I was the successful candidate, and it gave us a tremendous opportunity to outline what our programme was for this election, and also how we would intend to fight the campaign.
The general election was a springboard for a whole campaign group starting in Hove. Tanushka, who did really well in that. What's the situation with the Greens? Because I remember she's telling us about how the Greens had a paper candidate in the general election, as in they didn't put much work into it, and they did quite well because of their name. Has the Independent Socialist branding or identity impressed people more now? Are there people more aware of that as an alternative?
Brighton and Hove has got a unique situation because the Greens have twice run the council, and both times it's ended up badly for them. So in 2013, when they first ran the council, they provoked a significant bin strike, which has got echoes of what's happening in Birmingham at the moment. And then when they ran the council, they took over again during the pandemic, when Labour expelled a number of councillors on bogus grounds of anti-Semitism. And again, because they work within the constraints that the central government sets them for funding, they end up cutting services. And so, for example, one of the issues which we're highlighting in this campaign is the threat to schools. Brighton and Hove is an incredibly expensive place to live, and so school numbers are falling because children and families have been forced out of the area. Now, the Green Party proposal was to have all party talks about what to do about the shortage of children, the surplus of places. Our proposal is to cut reception classes to 25 from September next year, because we think children have been badly affected by the pandemic, and if reception classes were cut to 25, it would help catch up with their development. I've been told by one of the Labour councillors that that would be illegal. Well, I'd like to see a Labour government taking a Labour council to court because it was trying to improve education.
Can you tell us a bit about your background? What got you into standing in this election? What got you into politics? What motivated you to become political?
Well, I was Tanushka's agent for the general election campaign, which was an absolutely fascinating experience because Tanushka's campaign energised so many people. But I have also been a long-term campaigner. I've got a particular interest in housing and disability, and those are issues which are to the fore in this campaign. There's an enormous issue about the shortage of affordable housing in Brighton, sky-high rents. There's even the belief that people are moving from Brighton and Hove to London because housing here is so expensive. In the last few weeks, there's also been the scandalous announcement by Liz Kendall and Keir Starmer about the proposed cuts to disability benefits. Already, almost half of children who are living in poverty are living in families where one of the parents is disabled. Proposals to restrict PIP is an absolutely brutal assault. It goes further than the Tories. It goes further than George Osborne proposed when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Has the Labour candidate or any local Labour councillors said anything against the cuts to disability payments? What are they saying locally? I mean, is that an issue that you're hearing about when you knock on doors?
Definitely. Now, 2 years ago when there were the all-out elections in Brighton and Hove, Labour got elected with 38 councillors out of 54. So far, 6 have stood down from the council over the last 2 years for various reasons. One of the Labour councillors stood down just recently over the issue about the cuts to overseas aid, but there's been a silence from them over disability. I think Labour's in for a big shock on May the 1st. I think Labour will lose seats all over the country. I'm calling in particular for the TUC Disabled Workers Committee to organise a lobby of Parliament. We think that should be a starting measure, and that the radical unions should organise a weekend demonstration. I think a lot of people are very disappointed about this Labour government and are looking for an alternative. And I think in a radical area like Brighton and Hove, there's good grounds to hope that an independent socialist candidate can make a good impact in this election.
With this by-election, you're going to pick up a lot of data and you'll know who your voters are, so that will help when we come to the next general election, when maybe Tanushka or someone else is standing against Peter Kyle. Seems like Peter Kyle is the person that most people in Brighton and Hove that I've spoken to are really determined to try and unseat.
My view is we're not waiting to 2029. I think the Labour government could well fall before then. You know, there's talk in the papers 80 Labour MPs could lose their majority because of the cuts to disability benefits. If Labour takes the same sort of brutal action which it took over the MPs who rebelled over the benefit cap, then Labour could lose its majority. If it makes concessions, it shows that it's a weak government which is susceptible to pressure. Either way, we need mass campaigns on the streets to put pressure on that government. And I think that gives the reasons why I think the government won't necessarily last 5 years, and we need to be prepared for it.
I mean, you've still got time here, so I mean, if people can come down here on the day and in the week before the election and make a big noise about what's happening to these disability cuts, what's happening with the child benefit cap, what's happening with winter fuel allowances. I mean, these are all issues. This is a time for people to make a stand. I can't think of a better candidate. Thank you for speaking to me.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Crispin. Thank you for coming down. That's been great.